We're going to get our next panel, and our last panel in the series of three, Who Does the Work, kicked off here. And really excited. This whole conference has really been the brainchild of Dean Smith in our law school, really framing up how we work, who does the work, and where we work in a meaningful way that really ties in this whole narrative of future professions. So with that, we're ending the triad with who does the work. And who does the work is a really exciting thing. First, I'd like to welcome to the stage Ed Walters, who's the CEO and co-founder of Fastcase, which is an online legal research software company based in Washington, D.C. Under Ed's leadership, Fastcase has grown into one of the world's largest legal publishers, currently serving more than 800,000 subscribers around the world. Next up, I'd love to welcome Richard Baer. He's the Chief Legal Officer at Liberty Media Corporation, and he's been active in such holdings as Liberty TripAdvisor Holdings, Liberty Broadband Corporation, and most recently, Formula One. And he's also served as Executive Vice President and Chief Legal Officer of United Healthcare previous to that, and was formerly Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Quest. So really excited to have you here today, Richard. And then joining us, our special guest and Chairman of the DU Board of Trustees, Chairman Doug Scrivener. He also, in a previous life to his amazing dedication to the university, served Accenture as the General Counsel. One of the very first counselors hired there, grew it into an incredible enterprise of over 300 lawyers, and really saw that enterprise span under his leadership, and left there to really lead our activity here at the university. And it's going to be moderated today by Dean Smith of the School of Law, and we welcome you to kick this off and end our triad of who does the work. Thank you so much.
So thanks very much, Eric. And as I was thinking about this panel, I was reflecting back on my days as an associate at a major DC law firm in the 1990s. There, the question of who does the work was in part a discussion of whether the work would be done by in-house counsel or by lawyers, and maybe which lawyers within the firm might handle that work, a partner or an associate. And since that time, our world has changed tremendously. Law firms have become much more fragmented in terms of their internal organization. Much more legal work, of course, is now being sent across national boundaries and borders. And as our discussion this morning with Daniel Susskind indicated, we are now bringing even more interesting and intriguing, maybe even threatening tools to bear on this work of lawyers. And I want to start at that very outer limit in what we might call the possibility of robot lawyers. So at the last time I was in London, I went to a sushi restaurant where the food was delivered on a conveyor belt. A machine had replaced completely the human server who might operate in that setting. And during this particular conference, we posed a very interesting question on your own Twitter feed, which is, what human work cannot be replaced by machines? My question to you is, are robot lawyers a realistic possibility? If so, why? And if not, why?
Well, that's a great question. It's funny, I was thinking about that going into this as well. When Dean Smith and I were at our law firm, our firm was handling the then ExxonMobil work. And we had to build behind the building a dock for 18-wheelers. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you, they would unload all the boxes from one, and it would drive away, and another 18-wheeler would follow right behind it. Today, the entire work product of that document production would fit on external hard drive about the size of this thing. So it's kind of incredible to reflect on how fast and how far we've come in that respect. There's a game going on right now in Silicon Valley. It's called, I Bet You Can't Do This. Every time somebody says, yes, well, machines can't possibly do this because my profession is different, engineers in Silicon Valley will then try to make machines do that exact thing. And occasionally, lawyers or doctors or accountants will say, there is an element of lawyering that cannot be done by machines. And I think that's just adorable. Many of them will. When you ask about robot lawyers, I teach a class at Georgetown called The Law of Robots. And it deals with how law changes as machines make more and more decisions. And we see it in industry after industry, things that we thought could only be the domain of people because of their expertise. Now more and more are being done by machines. Are we going to see cyborg lawyers sitting in the leather chairs in law firms? No. But what we define as the work of lawyers is going to get smaller and smaller over time. Just like we used to have armies of lawyers who would go through those boxes of documents. And today have technology assisted review and e-discovery software that does it suggestively with machine learning. So in the future, the traditional jobs of lawyers will become smaller and smaller. What we define as the practice of law will be fundamentally different over time. I think of a friend of mine named Kingsley Martin, who was told at some point, there's no way that machines can draft contracts because the situations are so different. I'm an expert at employment agreements. For example, I know when I see them using my judgment, my expert judgment as a lawyer, when a contract provision is standard and when it's outside the norm. So what Kingsley did was he said, that's great. You've done maybe 83 employment agreements in your long career. You have expert judgment in this. Then Kingsley went and downloaded 250,000 employment agreements from the SEC Edgar database. And then he used machine learning to crunch them all together. And what he found was there's exactly 9 provisions of an employment agreement, and they're pretty standard. There's 2 that come up in certain circumstances. They're also pretty standard. But then you can know. He created a library of what the contract terms are. Is this contract standard for a lawyer isn't a binary answer, although they'll say yes. It really is about a continuum. It's a question that's answered by data, right? So 83 data points isn't data. That's like anecdata, right? 83 data points is a hunch. 250,000 data points is data. So Kingsley said, he illustrated it in a very clear way. His company is called KM Standards or Contract Standards, illustrated it in a very tangible way that you can draw insights from big data using machine learning that will far outpace the human judgment of lawyers. Will it always be the case? No. There will always be the domain for specialized, bespoke lawyering, at least as far into the future as any of us can see. But there will also be large parts of law that are done today by $200, $2,000 an hour lawyers that won't even be considered legal work in the future. Machines will do it, and they'll do it much better. Closing thought on this. When we think about robot lawyering, we tend to think about the impact on lawyers. And let me encourage everyone to think about it differently, right? We should think about the impact on clients. What legal work is really about is not about the lawyer, it's about the person who is receiving that service. All of our provision of law and other professions as well is based on a model of scarcity. The promise of artificial intelligence, or robot lawyering, if you will, is that we have the opportunity to make a transition from an era of scarcity to an era of abundance. Will it be easy? No. There'll be bumps along the way. Will that accrue to the benefit of clients? Absolutely. The American Bar Foundation in 2014, a branch of the American Bar Association, the ABF did a survey, a longitudinal study, the biggest one of its kind, 1,100 people, 1,100 Americans. And they wanted to see when people had legal problems, what they would do with them. And what they found was that 80% of people who have legal problems bypass the legal services system. They don't go to law firms or lawyers to solve those problems. They bypass it altogether. So that is both an indictment and a huge opportunity. It's an indictment of our legal services. I think Dan Lear alluded to this in the last panel. Our clients and people have problems, they don't know how to bring them to us, and we need to get closer to them. But also an opportunity. If you think about this like a venture capitalist would, this is a giant latent market. The market for legal services in America is like 5 times as big as the market that we can see today. So if we can figure out
using some combination of automation and expertise, how to serve people better. There is more money involved in that, more opportunity involved with that, and more opportunity to do good for clients than we could ever anticipate. That is at least the hope. I've got a little more to say about that, about the transition between an era of scarcity to an era of abundance. If there's time later on, maybe I'll address that.
So we've talked a little bit at the outset in what is perhaps a futurist vein, the possibility of robot lawyers, maybe even robot judges. But I want to take it to a very current issue, which is how legal work is being sourced. We often look to the general counsel as the gatekeeper in terms of legal work, determining where it should go, the balance between insourcing or outsourcing that work to lawyers or others. And I want to turn to you, Rich, and ask you, firstly, as an experienced GC in multiple settings, how has your sourcing of legal work changed over time, and what explains those changes?
Well, I have to admit it has not changed as much as it should have, and that's on me. I think that the change that you're predicting, which I agree with in large part, is only going to come from clients. It's not going to come from the law firms, because the law firms, despite some of the other speakers who are here this morning who I have great respect for, the law firm's model is based on inefficiency, and they have no motive to change. Richard Susskind told me a story once where he said he would be flown over from Europe, meet with the managing partners of several white shoe law firms in New York City. He would talk to them about how the future is upon them. They have to change. If they don't change, they'll be left behind. The partners nod very sagely and agree with him. Then he goes out to Kennedy and flies back to Europe, and he knows that all those partners go back to their firms and don't change one thing. And he attributes that to the fact that it's hard to convince a room full of millionaires that their business plan is faulty. And so the firms are not going to change unless we force them to change. I have failed in that. I have tried to change sourcing among our law firms, but here are some areas where I have seen some advancement. One is around factual development in litigation. Most law firms and most clients just have associates at law firms go and interview witnesses. So we have a model where we take kids, at least in my eyes they are kids, who maybe have been in the business world 2, 3, 4 years. Prior to that have just been in law school and before that in college. And we ask them to interview people from all walks of life and try to get from them their recollections of matters that may have occurred a long time ago, matters that may be really just all caught up with emotion and all the other things that impact a person's recollection. And we have these kids who have absolutely no capability of developing these facts, doing witness interviews. I grew up not in the hallowed halls of a big New York City law firm. I grew up as a homicide prosecutor in Brooklyn, New York. And I was trained by homicide detectives from the Brooklyn South Homicide Division who had been questioning witnesses for 30 to 40 years. They could literally question a CEO of a Fortune 10 company or a recent immigrant who was driving a cab in the streets of Brooklyn and immediately develop a rapport and over time elicit everything that that person recalled, and even perhaps some things they didn't recall about a matter, about an incident, about something that they witnessed. We have been trying to, in that context, bring in former FBI agents, bring in former police detectives who are far more equipped at developing facts, which is half of what it takes to win a lawsuit, if not more, to do that. Law firms look down on it, they're absolutely resistant to it, and they reject the results. And it's only if a client insists that that's the way we're going to develop the facts in the case will you see a change. So I just use that as one example of how sourcing is slightly changing, but again, it is like being caught in quicksand of my own making in large part, but in dealing with the firms and trying to get them to think differently about sourcing.
So we're going to come back to other innovations in the area of business and data analytics in a moment, but I want to turn to you, Chairman Scrivener, and talk a little bit about the world of compliance. When I was in practice in Washington, D.C. in the 1990s, it was at the time of significant debates between accounting firms and law firms as to how certain types of work should be apportioned between them, the multidisciplinary practice rules and others. The world seems to have changed a little bit, at least within the world of Accenture, a company, of course, of 300,060 employees, global in nature, a massive influential compliance practice, and one that draws on many different skill sets, on data scientists, on lawyers, no doubt on many, many other fields. Could you talk a little bit about the world of compliance and whether it is in some ways an example of these boundaries basically breaking away, maybe upon client demand?
Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. It is an extraordinarily changing world, the world of compliance, from the early days of the late 80s, early 90s, and the U.S. federal sentencing guidelines and the Caremark decision in Delaware, to today's world where there's a recognition of the risks to reputation, the financial risks, the importance in terms of reputation of a company to do as much as you can do to manage the compliance function, and which starts actually with ethics and culture and values, which are not things that lawyers think about or necessarily are trained to think about very well. But you're absolutely right. It will vary greatly based on the size, scale, nature of the business, how you think about tackling those issues. But for a multidisciplinary international business like Accenture, we had to think about how do you deal with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, as just one example. How do you identify the kinds of transactions or relationships that can be potential red flags? And in the old days, you just sort of waited for something to come over the transom. There are now a set of tools and analytical approaches to analyzing on a real-time basis transactions, looking for common names, looking for strange names, looking for amounts that recur regularly, for other kinds of signals that require further investigation. So that requires an understanding of the business and then the ability to bring the analytical tools, the technology tools to bear on problems of that nature. You think about anti-money laundering in the financial services industry. HSBC 6 or 7 years ago paid $1 billion fine and agreed to a monitor for 3 years and agreed to have 8,000 people in its anti-money laundering compliance function who are looking at every single transaction and the know your customer rules and all that kind of stuff. And you think about just 8,000 people in what is a very small sliver of the regulatory regime that governs a financial institution like that. There got to be better ways, and finding the right kind of people with the right kind of skills and the right kind of tools is what compliance officers and, well, frankly, what boards are expecting of their compliance officers and general counsels and CFOs and the other leadership of the organization to figure out how to address.
I think it's worth just emphasizing, maybe from the perspective of the law school dean, but among those 8,000 compliance officers, relatively few in the current setting are lawyers. In fact, many will be operating on certificates, not even on necessarily degrees in the relevant field. Certificates in audit, certificates in compliance, clearly something with implications for the way businesses are looking to lawyers and looking to other fields. I want to stick with Accenture for a moment because we had a very stimulating panel in the morning that focused on where we work. And if we think about companies in this country, many times we have a corporate headquarters in an iconic downtown building. It might be the Pittsburgh Plate and Glass building in Pittsburgh. It might be the Transamerica building. Accenture took a different view towards its organizational management, if you will, towards its sense of what a headquarters or not might do for that company. It did not have an iconic building, nor, as I understand it, necessarily, I mean, it has many buildings, but it did not have the same type of approach to headquarters as many companies would do. Is that a fair characterization? And what did it get the company, if so?
Yep, it is a fair characterization. In 1989, when Andersen Consulting, which is the predecessor name to Accenture, was created as a separate business unit under the umbrella of Andersen Worldwide. So you had Arthur Andersen that did audit and tax and certain kinds of consulting. You had Andersen Consulting. Our then managing partner, didn't want to move, but reacted badly to the historical iconic tower in Chicago that was the home of Arthur Andersen. And he said, I don't want to have a headquarters. I don't want to have everybody coming to me. I want to be a virtual business where me as the managing partner and all of my leadership team are actually out and about, living in different communities, always on airplanes a lot, but using technology increasingly over the years to stay in touch. Want them close to our clients, close to our people, as opposed to huddled together in the tower and only having things, information that comes filtered through various kinds of information flows and channels. So that meant that George was on the road 90% of the time. Every trip he would take, he would meet with clients. He would spend time with our employees. He was able to get a sense. I mean, he could walk into a room and understand what's going on. He could walk into a company and get a feel for what the needs of that company were. Importantly, our people saw him. They saw all of our leadership. They saw how they acted. They saw how they acted together. We were able to model the behaviors in a way that you can't do from top-down memos or even videos or other communication channels today. And that created a part of the DNA and the culture of what is today Accenture that is irreplaceable. At the same time, we made a decision that we did not want to keep expanding our real estate footprint. So over the course of the last 20 years, other than in India and the Philippines and a few places where we have 3 shifts of people doing transaction processing or code testing or other things, we have shrunk the footprint even though the company has doubled in population in the last less than 10 years. And that means that, as a general proposition, the Accenture's people are making money when they're at a client site, because that's where the work typically gets done, or they're working from home. We had to deal with that in the legal function. In fact, they were even more aggressive with the support functions in saying, 1 day a week in the office. We said maybe 2, because we're adding a lot of people, and some element of that acculturation and orientation needed face time. But once you had achieved that, either they were on the road helping negotiate contracts, or they were working from home, connected seamlessly by technology. But that virtual working style worked extraordinarily well for us. On the other hand, it's also a risky proposition. If you don't have the culture, I mean, you think about Accenture, you look at the 10K of the top 20 people who are named in the 10K, the average tenure with a firm is 25 years. They know each other, they trust each other, there is a culture, there is a DNA to the place. You think about WorldCom, Bernie Evers was in Mississippi, his general counsel was in Washington, his CFO was in Boca Raton, and that is an element for how Bernie Evers was able to run the place the way he did and drive it into the ditch, because there was not that kind of integration and glue that kept the place together.
So Rich, I want to turn back to you on a theme that you raised already in your comments, which relates to fact development, to the use of tools to develop facts within an organization. I remember keenly when I was in law school, a professor, and now a mentor of mine, saying to the assembled class, 95% of what you think are legal cases are resolved on facts. Not on law, not on a Supreme Court case or interpretation that you'll find. Who ran the red light, this car or that car? You have already spoken about fact development through the use of homicide detectives and other experts. But I want to turn to a different source, which is sort of business analytics and the power of organizations, whether it's Lex Machina or others, to assess the value of a patent case or how much a litigation burn should be. You have been, and by any standard, a national leader in thinking about those topics. Could you maybe just offer some general insights on the power of those tools to help companies and clients more generally?
Well, I've spoken a lot about it. I don't know that I'm a leader, because a leader would have accomplished more. But I have spoken a lot about big data in the legal profession. Next to the medical industry, I think there's no industry that has more data at its fingertips to evaluate the entire aspect of delivering its services and doing it more effectively. But it's also a database that is laying fallow today. No one is tapping into that data at all in any meaningful way. What am I talking about? Well, firstly, we have the court files. So everything at the federal level, much at the state level, is now accessible over the internet, accessible electronically, can be groomed and gathered and then analyzed. And what we can do from that is analyze the results of matters. I go to a lawyer now today on an employment case. We're being sued, let's say, by a former employee who says she was retaliated against. And I go to the lawyer and I say, well, what is a reasonable settlement value for this case? Should we pay our lawyers $150,000, or can I settle this case for $100,000 and save $50,000? And that lawyer, and I use very, very experienced lawyers around the country, will tell me her anecdotal experience as to how this case would work out. And she is tapping into her personal database of cases that she has handled. Maybe she's very, very experienced, so she's handled 200 employment cases. Yet there are hundreds of thousands of employment cases whose results are reflected in these court files that if we gathered them all together, I could look at and say, here is how a retaliation case is resolved on a nationwide basis. Here's how many cases have gone to jury trial. Here's what the results of those jury verdicts. Were they for the plaintiff? Were they for the defendant? I could narrow it down to say, here is, in front of this particular judge or set of judges, here's how this case works out. I could be much more intelligent in my assessment of the risk if we were able to get all of that, what I call results data. It's the data in the court files pulled together. So that's a piece of it. The other piece is electronic billing. For those of you who are not lawyers, all lawyers now bill their time, and hopefully in 6-minute increments. So we have a photograph of what they do every 6 minutes. And that is all put into an electronic database that is then sent to the clients who do nothing with it. We could take that data, pool it. I could pool it with just my former companies, CenturyLink and United Health Group and Liberties. We could pool all that data together. And we could understand far better what lawyers do, how they do it, and how to get them to be more efficient and effective in doing it. That data is out there today. I believe that every case, I should know the cost of a case based upon the number of witnesses and the number of millibytes of electronic information. And I should be able to say, this is a 10 millibyte, 10 witness case, and my cost should be X. And then I can go to the law firms and negotiate with them to say, well, I want to now pay X minus 5%. But until I have that data, until I know what my cost should be by looking at all of the historical electronic billing data, I can't have those conversations. So for those of you who are in law school or in business school or want to look at carving out areas in the legal profession, these are the areas. Anyone who wants to do this, I'll sit down with you for hours and talk with you about it, but there are immense opportunities for innovators in the legal profession. And I'll end with this. I love to say one thing about the legal profession. It is a profession that has not changed in the way it delivers its services in the last 200 years and is proud of that fact. What better industry that would be ripe for innovation than the legal profession?
Rich, that reminds me of a story, actually. I don't know if you know the story of John D. Rockefeller, but he wasn't born a Rockefeller, right? His mom was a homemaker, a school teacher. His dad was literally a snake oil salesman, right? Dad didn't come home a whole lot. So when Rockefeller graduated from school, he couldn't find a job, and he went to go work with his brother, who was in the home fuel oil refining business. So what they would do is they would pump oil out of the ground, they would refine it for heating homes, right? And then they'd take all of the waste and pour it into the Ohio River. And it was Rockefeller's kind of accounting mind that said, I wonder if we could make something out of the byproducts. So what are we pouring into the river here? One of the byproducts was gasoline, right? When you refine crude oil out of the ground to make home fuel oil, one of the waste byproducts is gas. Now, it happened, this was right at the front edge of the age of the automobile, right? And he didn't know that, but it was his kind of curious mind to look beyond what everyone else saw in this crude oil that gave rise to one of the biggest empires in America. Actually, when Rockefeller died, on real dollar terms, he is the wealthiest person who has ever lived. It's estimated his fortune in current terms would be about $1.5 trillion. But you know, we also are on the cusp of an age of data analytics. Lawyers, accountants, doctors will be using data in ways we never have before. And we, as lawyers especially, think our only product is an hour, right? That's what we sell. Occasionally we'll sell a document, but mostly we're charging just for the hours. And we pour everything else into the river. But there's gold in it, in that exhaust data, if we can harvest it and collect it. So in my day job, I'm the CEO of a software company, Fastcase, and we have like the entire legal database. And so we're trying to do all of this kind of forward-thinking stuff beyond just selling access to judicial opinions and statutes. 3 skunkworks projects, if I may. First, we built a big data citator. We don't have the team at Shepard's, like 100 people for 100 years who read every case. Instead, we use the data in the database to harvest all the information out. We created the first big data citator. Second, kind of what you were talking about, Rich, we, just out of curiosity, right, a kind of a giggles project, downloaded the metadata for every case filed in federal courts from PACER for 2012, 750,000 cases. Now I can tell you what judge in America has the least amount of cases, who the most productive judge in America is, who the least productive judge is. How many days does a wage and hour case take in the Northern District of California versus the Southern District of New York? If I'm going to bring a patent case, where am I going to resolve it fastest? What's the seasonality of litigation against Walmart? When is Liberty or AIG going to be sued next? The answers are all right there. But you have to collect the data, structure the data, and make sense about it. You have to think of it differently. Lastly, there's a lot that's baked into these databases that could help us create whole new industries. So one of our skunkworks projects right now is we have this kind of weird hunch that you could make law computable. Law is code, sometimes people say. We actually want to make it into code, right? So you could use law to write code to understand the relationships between people, between companies, and have it be actually computable like computer code. You can see where it breaks and where the bugs are. You can understand obligations in a way that people can't. And you can identify trends, problems way before they happen if you can make the actual law computable. But it requires like a totally different way of thinking about the things we do today. You talk about the way you might understand an obligation ahead of time. Every client in America, our company is a client to like 4 law firms, comes in with a handful of questions. How long is this going to take? How much is this going to cost? No lawyer in America can answer that question, right? It's a major frustration, but we totally could. I mean, the answers are there. It's not unknowable, it's just unknown. It requires a different mindset about professional services and what the job of lawyers is.
So we're going to turn to questions from our attendees, but Ed, if I could just very briefly from you. You've now had the chance to sort of look back in your professional life on your innovation experience. And one might imagine barriers to entry for innovators in the legal world. Those could be regulatory authorities. They could be access to venture capital. They could be skepticism of colleagues. There could be a whole host of reasons why people would not venture forth in the places you've gone. As you look back and size up the innovation economy in the legal world, are you bullish or are you pessimistic from your perspective?
I am hugely optimistic. If I had known that we would have to go as long as we did to make fast case work, I might not have done it in hindsight. We started in November of 1999, which in hindsight might be like the worst month in American history to start a software company. Like the entire internet economy went off a cliff right after we got started. But legal tech actually is having a moment right now. There's a ton of money chasing around legal tech companies. And as you know, as Rich and as the chairman said, there are so many opportunities right now to think of things differently, to innovate, to solve client problems. If it is a feature of your profession that it hasn't changed in 200 years, it is so ripe for disruption, right? So there are huge opportunities. And in some sense, as William Gibson says, the future is here, it just isn't evenly distributed. There are great opportunities to make entirely new industries in legal and legal services just by thinking about clients differently. If we think that the size of the market for legal services is 5 times what it is right now, that would make venture capitalists salivate. And this is a do good by doing well or do well by doing good opportunity. If you could serve people who aren't currently served by legal services, you could move mountains. It's such a great opportunity. In the Industrial Revolution, cars were scarce. Nobody had them. Right? It was an artisan thing. It would be like having a Patek Philippe watch, a handcrafted, very expensive object of art, but that no one really had. Henry Ford said, I think we could do it better. I think we could make cars in a way that anybody could afford them, right? And so we introduced these things like assembly lines, standard parts, division of labor, automation, in ways that made cars so much faster. Before he started, it would take 12 hours to make a car. The same team that would assemble the tires would do the windshield glass. When he was done, it would take 90 minutes. You know why Model Ts are black? The paint wouldn't dry fast enough for him to make enough cars. There was one paint in the world, Japan Black, that would dry in 30 minutes. And so he said, I don't care what people want, they're going to get Japan Black, because that's what it's going to take to make cars abundant, to make sure everyone can have one. And so he used Japan Black paint. And look, is it going to be the same as the Daimler-Benz being made in Germany at the same time? No, but everybody can have one. It created the American century. And we are right on the cusp of that kind of an age of abundance, that kind of age of data science, for the professions generally, for law specifically, if we're courageous enough to seize the opportunity. Hugely bullish.
Well, on that positive note, maybe we will open it up to the audience. And we have, of course, a number of lawyers, but we need not confine our questions to that area of expertise. Please. But
That's a great question. Look, first of all, I think lawyers fall back on that as an excuse. They don't want to have to grapple with whether it is or implicates a violation of the rules of professional ethics. I do think we need to work with the bar associations to loosen up the reins some. But look, so much of what we do with all due respect to the dean, I didn't need to go to law school for. And I would argue all of those things can be done and should be done by someone who is not necessarily admitted to the bar. And if the rules don't allow for that, we need to change those rules. Again, lawyers are protecting their turf. They are protecting their profession. The leaders of the bar, the leaders of the legal profession they have roughly 15 more years left in their career. They don't want that career to change. They want it to stay the same. So there are some real hurdles to get over to change the culture of the profession. But I think it can easily be done. And I'll be honest with you, and I'm sure I'll get in trouble for saying this. I'll push it as far as I can, and I'll let someone tell me that I can't do it, as opposed to just self-edit and decide we're not going to do it because it might implicate some rule of professional ethics somewhere.
You know what I love? I love Minute Clinic. And you guys have Minute Clinic in Denver? So they put like in the pharmacy in CVS, they'll put like a physician's assistant, right? And you can just walk in. So this is revolutionary in Washington, D.C. and a couple of other markets. If my kid has a sore throat and I need to know whether it's strep, I can set up an appointment with this pediatrician for 9 days from now, right? By which time he will have strep or not. Or I can go to the CVS, which is on my corner, and I can walk in and sign up, and 20 minutes later, a physician's assistant will administer a rapid strep test and say, your kid does not have strep, okay? So they're everywhere. These Minute Clinics are not administered by doctors, they're administered by physician's assistants, but they can prescribe drugs in certain cases, they can administer simple tests. If it's, a brain aneurysm, they're gonna send you to the emergency room. They can't handle everything, but they can handle a lot. And I would love to see that kind of democratization of legal services, where we say we're gonna have a division of labor concept. Certain things need to be handled by M&A lawyers, but certain things just don't, right? And automation will obviously play a part too. If you look at the jobs that used to be done in electronic discovery when there were manual discovery, when the firm would send Dean Smith to a warehouse in New Jersey to go through 700 boxes to look for a document that everyone knew didn't exist, but they had to send a lawyer through that process. Is the lawyer happier that that is done by software? Actually, yes, because they get to do things that are more fun. Software company's happy. You might have the review done by paralegals, and the paralegals are psyched too. Are there fewer lawyers in the world of e-discovery? No. Are there fewer paralegals? No. There's actually more work. Our whole history, from the Industrial Revolution to auto manufacturers, every time you have these eras of disruptive innovation, there are always more jobs, not less. People said with the assembly line and automation, Ford would destroy the auto industry. There wouldn't be enough jobs for people, when exactly the opposite was true. It started a 100-year era for Ford where people had more and better jobs at higher wages. It had a name. They actually called it Fordism. And we could have an era of Fordism for law if we kind of followed that example. Division of labor, automation, standard parts to make legal services available to more people.
I think there's another set of important questions, though, that flow from the kinds of the questions you asked and many of the trends that Daniel talked about this morning, and that is, how do we train young lawyers for this new world? Law schools can do more. They are doing more. The Educating Tomorrow's Lawyers initiative at ISLES is a big part of thinking about that. But much of that training got done by being in the warehouse, and it may not have been very effective, but that's how law firms trained. Law departments aren't going to do it, really can't do it very well, but they're not going to pay for the law firms to do it. How do we collectively as a profession assure that our young professionals are getting the exposures and the training they need to be able to be the leaders of tomorrow? We don't have all the answers for that yet.
Chancellor Chop, Chancellor of the University of Denver.
So my question is really to follow up on that, and it's kind of two parts. How do you see data analytics transforming education? Where you talked about the professions of law and business, finance, medicine, but think about the data we have on all of our students and all of our faculty. So imagine that, and then also how should we, and then how are we going to
No.
No.
I would love to see a little nuance in the data on both sides. So when we're grading students, it tends to be this lame A through F tariff schedule, right? This person is an A minus, this person is a C plus. We could do it more like Myers-Briggs or something, right? Who is this student? They're not a B minus, they're an ENTF. They are high on empathy and high on analytical reasoning. So maybe they would be a good interviewer for Rich. Maybe they'd be someone who would really do a good job of taking in those facts. Boy, I tell you, as someone who is hiring graduates, I would love to know that. I don't want to know that B plus in con law, that doesn't tell me anything, right? Who is this person? Schools know better than anybody. You've had the person for 4 years, 3 years, depending on what school it is. I would love to see some more data analysis, that tells us who these people are and what their strengths are. I think students would like that too. As a teacher, I think it's a little bit threatening, but I think we could do a lot better also with information about the classes. And I know we're starting to see a little more of that. There's a few apps now where students rate their teachers. I mean a little bit more than that, but I think it would be good to know what classes I should take to develop these kinds of reasoning in my career path. So I think the last thing is we got to change the core curriculum. For undergraduates, I think especially for law school, we are really training people to be the brightest lawyers of the 1800s. And I would love to see a little more rigorous training in things like accounting. Someone said to me when I was in law school, you should cross-list accounting from the business school. And I thought it was like the dumbest thing I had ever heard. And man, do I regret that. It would have been so useful as a practicing lawyer to understand accounting better, understand the problems that my clients face. I would also like to see a lot more real-world clinical classes. What do you say when you go into court? How do you represent clients? How do you interview someone when they come in? People graduate from law school, especially not having any idea. And then last, I think that there are some kind of basic office and technical skills that would be useful in the curriculum, both for undergrads and for law schools. Maybe it's not like a traditional law school class where you have a 3-credit class. Maybe you have an intercession boot camp or something where you say, look, you're going to be working in a law firm. Here's how to use styles in Microsoft Word, right? I don't want to have a whole class about this, but you should graduate knowing how to do this because you're going to do it like 1,000 times. And if you're a client of people who do this 1,000 times a day and you are paying $250 an hour for someone to fumble around in Microsoft Word, it's going to drive you
Where
nuts.
can I get a lawyer at that price?
Right, exactly. So I would love to see just, some basic office skills and, I don't need like Python coders in my law firm lawyers, but I would like to see them know how to do like pivot tables in Excel. The kind of basic things they're going to need to be successful in the office place, both for undergraduates and for law students.
I am not one who is advocating that law schools, and that's all I know about, should change dramatically how they're educating their students. And I know there's been a lot of great work at IELTS and other great institutions looking at that, but the forensic skills that every lawyer needs take a long time to learn. The issues of how to figure out the facts, how to figure out the rules, whether it's case law or regulation, how you apply those rules to the facts, how you communicate and advocate. Those are skills that just don't deserve a year's worth of education. I believe 2-3 years should be focused on that. I think if a law school is trying to change the approach, I don't want a lawyer who comes out of law school who has been taught how to try a case. I think that's frankly a joke and a waste of time. They'll learn how to try a case over 10, 15, 20 years. They're not going to ever learn it in any meaningful way in law school. But if you want to carve out an area, it's to teach the students how to think more innovatively about what we're doing. So they have the forensic skills, and they're coming into this industry, people buy Neanderthals, and they have spent some time thinking how they can change it. Again, when I talk to older lawyers, everyone is depressed about being a lawyer. It's such a lousy profession. I talk to the younger lawyers. I tell them this is the most exciting time to be a lawyer because you have the opportunity to change this profession. And I think the deans of all the law schools are the ones who are going to be able to get that message across to them and give them some skills to look at it differently.
I would just quickly, at the undergraduate level in particular, I think using data to understand how people learn and then to map the teaching to how the individual learns, to assess and measure what they can do as opposed to what they may have learned, because the learning is going to be a lifelong exercise, but it's the skills to do things and the ability to work with others and all those other soft skills that I think with the use of that data we can make that experience and keep in school those kids who are struggling, to give them the support and help they need to make sure that they can complete. And that's particularly a challenge for first generation and for others who don't have the preparation that some others have the luxury of. So using the data to really identify the students who need extra help and serve that mission of the university to produce graduates who can go on and make a difference in the world.
So with the existence of law schools on the table, I'll at least say something about the University of Denver. I think one of the most exciting developments in the legal training relates to how we use data. And there's been a curiosity. Many law professors over the last decade have done work in empirical legal studies. So they focused on using data in their own scholarship, but law schools have not used much data in how they train their students. And one of the most exciting things about IALS, the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System, is a 24,000 respondee survey on what employers actually want. Not what law deans think employers want, but what employers actually want. And I think if law schools are going to take that seriously, as we do and as others should, we'll also need to look to employers to take those findings seriously. I go back to the days when I interviewed on campus, and the meandering discussions, oh, you were on the law review, I was too. These are not meaningful discussions. We could imagine a much more focused set of questions of the type used by some consulting firms. They could be psychological interviewing questions that actually get to real issues of grit, resiliency, adaptability. And I think there's great potential there for all students who have those skills. So, a final, JB, do you want to take us home? Or? Maybe a lightning round of responses.
I actually first met Rich in some diversity efforts that in-house general counsels were trying to get the law firms to up their game. And that was 20 years ago. They haven't gotten very far. But there's absolutely no question that it's half the labor pool if you think about women alone. You think about minority participants. But the diversity in its broadest sense is you get better decisions, you get better product by having different people with different perspectives, different experiences coming together, working collaboratively. So it's absolutely essential, and we aren't anywhere near where we need to be as a profession.
Look, diversity for me, for my company, is incredibly important, JB, and I have given up on the law firms. Again, as you can tell, I have some skepticism as to law firms, most generally, certainly on the diversity front. But we here in Colorado have a group of 30 general counsel who are mentoring a group of 30 diverse lawyers, and we define that very broadly to include anyone who's not rich, fair, older, white male. And we are trying to give them access to the leading legal decision makers in the state, who are the ones who decide who gets the business. And we're giving them access to a network that the rest of the more established partners of the law firms would die to get access to, both because the sheer access may result in them getting retained, but also the training and insight that we can give, because we hear from lawyers, one might say ad nauseum, but we hear from lawyers on a daily basis on different pitches and why we should hire them. And so we probably know better than anyone how to teach these diverse lawyers how to better pitch themselves and maintain and develop deeper engagement. So that's a very local effort on diversity, but my view is if we help 5 lawyers a year from that, that's more than most other groups are doing right now.
Yeah, I totally agree, Rich. I think that from my seat, and I expect a lot of people who make hiring decisions, it's really discouraging. Diversity is a real challenge. And I think, I hear a lot of peers say there's a real problem in the pipeline, which I think is kind of a cop-out. It's also a cop-out that's true, but it's a cop-out. So one of the things we try to do at Fastcase is to have a very active kind of internship and mentoring project. We'll bring a couple of students in who might otherwise be getting the message in their lives. You shouldn't be working in a legal technology company. And we show them you absolutely can, and you'd be great at it. And then I teach. If the part of the problem is the pipeline, then part of the solution is get in the pipeline, right? Find law students, and really try to encourage them on a very retail basis. It doesn't really solve anything in the macro. Macro, this is a giant problem. And I think, in the macro, I'm frankly stumped. But in the micro, I think we should try and do everything we can as individuals and, mentor people, encourage them along, show them what they're capable of in some cases if they don't believe it.
So we are at the conclusion of our hour. I want to thank the panelists for what was really a marvelous discussion, and thank all of you for your questions and for your attendance. So, Eric.
Thank you, Dean Smith. Thank you, Chairman Scrivener, Ed, and Rich. Really appreciate that inspirational and great closing portion of our 3 core components inside of the Future of Profession Summit today. Really excited for our closing keynote. Today with us we have Ed Moran, and Ed oversees the Innovation and Enterprise Solutions Group at one of the leading global accounting firms, KPMG. He's an expert in technology disruption, and we're thrilled to hear his keynote today, driving the continued relevance of the professions. So with that, I'm going to carry the podium on the stage and welcome Ed Moran.
So, good afternoon, and I assure you that was not done for dramatic effect. We had problems with the microphones and back. So nice to meet you, Ed Moran from KPMG. I'm here to... I was originally asked to speak about the relevance and driving relevance to the professions, but I think the last panel did an incredible job on that. So that was a terrific, I think, summation of many of the points we've been hearing come up. But what I'd like to do is first start with just a little questioning of the audience and a little actual feedback. So how many of you are actually nervous about what's happening to the professions vis-a-vis the Susskind's book? Raise your hand, say it loud, say it proud. Okay. How many of you had the conversation at some point with your spouse? I don't know, honey. I'm kind of worried about what's happening at the law firm, hospital, architecture firm, consulting company, auditing company. Have you had that conversation? Okay, good. Have you had the conversation with your kids? I don't know about that major. Sounds to me like that could be automated. Have you had that conversation? You have. Okay. Okay. So the great thing about the Susskind's book, and I actually read the book probably last summer when we were doing some work at KPMG in terms of disruption of our businesses. When I read it, I thought this is wonderful, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful book because it stops us from doing what I think a lot of folks are doing these days, and they jump right to the last chapter of how does technology play out. There will be robot overlords. We will maintain their cooling fans, and that will be all that's left for us. Matrix-like in its efficiency, where we will just be fodder for artificial intelligence's designs. With that said, there will be significant changes, okay? And I think we need to be very careful in how we look at these, and I think we need to be honest with ourselves, and I'm a KPMG, and we're an audit and advisory and tax firm. I'm a management consultant. I'm also a lawyer. We'll move a little bit away from law because we've heard a lot of it, so I'll look at some of the other professional services and how this might all play out. But we'll talk about that for about 20 minutes, then we'll do some questions and some discussion. And I think it'll be important to show you what we're working on, to give you some real in-the-trenches ideas of where is the technology headed, and in our view, some of the ways the professions will continue to remain relevant. So here's just some data points. We actually did research as we saw the world changing, and we read Suskind's books, and you read stuff like Rise of the Robots, which is another wonderful book on this topic. And you start to go out to clients and you ask them, right? And you break Henry Ford's first rule, right? If you go to a client, you ask them, what do you want? They'd say a faster horse, right? When they really wanted an automobile, but they didn't know it. But we went out and we talked to clients and we did research, we did some work with Forbes, and we identified that in audit, for instance, there was really a perception that things could change. And with technology, you might want to do audits more contemporaneously. You might want to not sample and look at much larger populations of data. And all these things make a lot of sense. Why are we making decisions based on historical information? Why can't we get much more contemporary information? So when we look at really where we are, this is a really useful chart for kind of either deciding where we are, where we're going, or where our businesses become irrelevant or not. This kind of walks us through it. So if you go to the lower left, you see that's where automation starts. Okay, that's pretty simple stuff. You're taking forms that are already understandable, and you feed a form and you do OCR and you look at it and you start to say, I can see some trends, I can see some things happening here. And as you move up the curve, you start to deal with things like unstructured language. Okay, and that's where it's just a PDF of stuff. Maybe it's a memo from a client meeting. Maybe it's notes from an appraiser on the value of a piece of property. So that kind of information is much more difficult for machines to handle. And I think a lot of us professionals look at that and say, they'll never understand, the computer will never understand my scribbled notes when I was sitting with the client about their complaints. And as a matter of fact, that's sitting in my chart. The computer won't even see it. And as we can see, we're starting to move in that direction, where everything is ingestible, okay? And we're ingesting a lot of different information. We'll talk about that in a moment, working with IBM Watson. It's amazing what can be ingested now into machines, okay? Again, are we moving to the place where I mentioned before, where machines become completely conscious and can do all the work that we can do, and we find ourselves sitting at home wondering, what is it we're going to do with the rest of our lives? Probably not, but it's important to know where we are on this progression. So what we did was, as part of this exploration and development, we began working with IBM Watson. We've all heard about Watson, terrific platform. A number of other companies are working on similarly advanced technologies that use things like machine learning so that machines can start to actually do things on their own. They don't have to be programmed to figure stuff out. They just somehow do it. And technical people can tell you how they do it, but it's quite amazing. And we're moving along in that regard. And you can show now a computer millions of photos of cats in all different places, and the computer will come back to you and say, I think this is a cat. And you just say, no. And the computer will come back a second later and say, is this a cat? You say, yes. And it just through very simple iterations like that, it will learn what a cat is, and we'll be able to spot a cat in any kind of frame very, very quickly, much quicker than we can. So when you start to see that kind of stuff, you say, wow, that's kind of like the stuff I do. I look at a fact pattern and I say, boom, trade secret issue. Boom, audit risk issue. Okay, boom, type 2 diabetes. A computer can start to do that. And in fact, they've begun starting to do that. So let me give you, I mentioned I'll actually show you some of the stuff that we're doing. So really exciting stuff like commercial mortgage loan audits, all right? So our clients look at the, a bank will have a bunch of loans out, and we'll look at the loans and we'll grade them. It'll say, we think this is a good loan. This one we're a little questionable about, and they'll actually assign numbers to it or letters to it. And as you know, we've had some problems in the past with mortgages not being as good as banks or other lenders might have thought. So it's a really important process. And if we could have a machine do it, just think, we wouldn't have to do what we do now and look at a small subset of these loans. We could churn through basically every loan that was ever written, conceivably, and figure out what are the real patterns here? What makes a good loan? So if I'm looking at a loan, I'd look at your prior history. Have you paid off your debts in the past? Do you have a lot of assets that you could draw down on? And are you in a region, in an area where property values are going up? That would probably be a loan officer decision algorithm of the past. You can teach a machine to do those things, but then the machine starts to learn other things. And it starts to say, wow, did you notice that if these other 7 things happen, that loan might be better or worse than a human would have thought? And again, something way off on the side like loan officers, okay? Thinking that, no, I really know my marketplace, I really know my region, I'm going to be able to figure this out better than anything can. We're starting to see it happening with machines. Okay, so this is the process we go through now. We take in the documents and think about it. You're going for a loan, you want to buy a mall. So you've got financial statements, you've got your own net worth statement written in a completely different format somewhere else. The bank sends an appraiser out, you send an appraiser out, your investors send an appraiser out. They all write them in different ways. Some are PDFs, some are Word documents. It's a mess. It could be hundreds of thousands of documents, right? So we go through it, we start to look at it, we say, here are the things that look important. Our client tells us what they think looks important. But what we're doing now is we can, I'm making this number up, and this number is low. We can ingest 1 million pages a second into Watson, looking at loans. So you can pretty quickly go through all the loan documents you have at that speed. Watson takes everything, handwritten notes, PDFs, appraisal documents, looks at them. We sit down with Watson, and I hate to make it sound like it's a he or a she or an it. It's all over the place. It's in the cloud. But we reach out to Watson and say, this is how we would look at this problem. Teach Watson. As you can see, we apply grading criteria, teach Watson to apply grading criteria. And we put a rating on it, KPMG, our auditors put a rating on it, and we compare it. And at some point we'll see anomalies, we'll see places where we don't agree, and then a human being will take over and sit down and look at it. So I sit in the meetings where we do this and we run it. We're also using other technologies, looking at many other data sets. Right? The world's full of data sets, and it's really interesting. You can get a bunch of experts together and say, who should win this litigation, or is this patent valid or defensible? And you'll get a difference of opinion between humans, as you would expect. And the machine will also then have problems because it's basing many times on human judgment. So it's only as good as the way we make decisions, because those decisions tend to get ingrained. And it's very, very interesting how we actually can get better by watching the machine, because we realize we're being inconsistent. And maybe if you have 3 experts together, the reason the machine came up with a different reason than one of the experts is because if you got 5 experts in the room, they would have come up with different outcomes as well. Okay, so it's not a binary, the machine's right or people are wrong, right? It's not that simple. It's much more nuanced than that. So we're now looking at huge data sets. Conceivably, we could look at every piece of data. Okay, it could transform accounting, could transform audit, where every single day, every transaction that mattered was looked at and compared. We're not there, but that's a possibility. So what do we do, right? So again, my segment for the next 10 minutes is about relevance, right? So what do we do? How do we as professionals stay relevant? And I don't want to make it sound defensive. Instead, we should be thinking about, where do we pick our battle? Where do we want to play? A lot of the things we've been hearing about from the legal side, accounting side, professional services, you don't want to do a lot of that work, okay? A lot of these things are being, quote, taken away from lawyers, taken away from accountants. It's work that you didn't go to all those years of school to do. And that's a critical thing. We talked a little bit about it when we touched on talent. I think talent's a critical issue here. So we're making the investment in technology, but as you see, we're also making an investment in people. In terms of diversity, there's all sorts of diversity. One of the diversities that we're investing in is really hiring different people. We just hired 2 people from DU that we normally wouldn't have hired, a business person and a computer science major, into a tax group where you'd say, what does tax need people like that for? That's not, that doesn't seem to be right. But we have to be very, very careful in getting the right sorts of people because the world is changing and what they're going to do is changing and boundaries are falling and adjacencies are all of a sudden very important. So we have to have different skill sets in the rooms. So we'll continue to make these investments in technology. Take the contrarian view, or maybe it's not contrarian. What happens with technology? Eventually, everybody gets it. Right? Remember that article 10 years ago, IT doesn't matter, and it provoked the firestorm of controversy? Of course it does. You can differentiate yourself on your technology. That doesn't seem to have played out that way. Okay? It becomes table stakes. So that's another thing to think about. What happens when everybody has this? So let's talk about some specifics that go right to, I think, the core of relevance. So think about regulation for a moment. And don't think about it like lawyers or accountants because we view it as a beautiful thing because it creates friction, right? Think about regulation. Regulation also helps protect people and allows people to make informed decisions about what are they doing, what kind of decisions are they making. If I walked in and I said, listen, I've got this machine that reads MRIs great and 99% of the time it's right, you should make your medical decisions based on it. Someone's going to ask me, how does it make the decision? Oh, that's really complicated. I don't know, but 99% of the time it's right. What about that 1% of the time? Haven't figured that out, but I think it'll get better. Right? Just something as simple as that is extraordinarily difficult with regulatory, and it should be, because we're asking people in some ways to bless a black box. We don't really know how this works. That's going to be an enormous problem. Let's say we developed a platform that could do audits perfectly. Let's say we developed a platform that could do litigation perfectly. Would you want anyone administering them? Probably not. You'd probably want someone with some modicum of expertise in those areas to administer them. We shouldn't think about this as a binary sort of situation where there'll be technology, again, there'll be the overlords, and there'll be us. What about if we had like glasses on, like Google Glass, that fed us artificial intelligence directly to us? 50 years from now, it might be an electrode in our heads where everything that we need to know is delivered to us instantaneously. Then what are we going to say? Technology's bad, AI is bad? What if everyone has AI, but I customize mine? And I say, come to me, because my law firm has got the special customized AI, just like electronic traders do on Wall Street. They all have access to supercomputers, but some of them can eke out a small advantage. Some hedge fund has a little algorithm that's a little bit better than everybody else's, and they make millions of more. Right? So let's not think about this as there's technology somewhere and there's us humans. These are things that we'll be using. We won't even see them. All right? Electricity was a big thing too. It was huge. And we don't ever talk about it. Indeed, we couldn't do any of these things without electricity. Right? It becomes embedded in all of our processes, in everything in every way we deliver value, and that's critical. Something to keep in mind that's also critically important is passion. Right? That word's come up a few times over today, the word passion. And think about what does passion mean. A lot of folks have done research on passion, and they find that folks who have passionate employees actually have better business outcomes. So when you think of passion, it's actually been boiled down to some elements. So one, it's a domain expertise. All right? It's people who, no one becomes a doctor, or lawyer, or accountant, architect, just because they happened into it. Right? It's years of hard work. It's years of commitment. it's a fascination with whatever the subject matter is. And oftentimes it's very expensive and everyone's telling you, you don't want to do this or you're not good enough to do this, right? So we don't fall into these things. So we've got that. We've got the passion. Another thing is a questing attitude, and we know that. We know those people who go above and beyond what they're supposed to do. The job description says this, and there are phone calls coming in from other departments. Why is this person calling me? Why is this person doing this? Those are people who display passion. And the third element of passion is that they connect with a lot of people. So they're the lawyers who call the accountants, say, explain to me how this works. They're the accountants who call the Python guys and say, I don't understand why this is working, explain it to me. All right? So those things are very, very important. And that's something we need to look for. Because if I'm right and this technology does become table stakes, where everybody has access to it, and everyone's reading all their loan agreements the way I just showed you, and everyone's got something to study every patent that was ever issued, and am I infringing or not, or is he infringing or not, where does the differentiation happen, right? And there will be differentiation because we always differentiate, because not every consumer is the same. And we can charge some of them more, we can charge some of them less, but there's always the opportunity to differentiate. Okay, so I told you we'd take some questions. I want to keep on time. Questions, observations, challenges about any of these topics. And remember, we're talking about relevance and how, notwithstanding the fact that we have this incredible technology coming, it doesn't mean that the professions we're involved in become irrelevant. Question? Great questions. So with regard to the workforce, so we actually have a workforce of the future initiative where we're looking at just those questions. And we're looking at it globally. And it's very interesting when you pull out of our regulatory scheme work and you go somewhere else where they might not have the same exact criteria, you sit there and you say, wow, that's an interesting approach that they took. You know, they got there later than we did, and we already had ours baked, but that's really interesting. Could we incorporate some of that? We just started the KPMG master's program where we take someone and we put them through a fifth year of school. They apply, and they have to have really a passion for data and analytics. Okay, so they go through classes in forensics and data science that the typical graduate wouldn't necessarily go through, because we've started to identify these are like really the capabilities we see being important. So we're finding the people that are passionate about it, and they go through a whole application process, and now I think we have 52 of them going into the program this fall, starting. So we're starting to roll out things like that, but it's an iterative process, and once you get it right, it's changed. Okay, and that's, I think, hard for organizations, because we like to optimize and say, we're done, okay? Done, that one's finished, and we figured out the workforce of the future. So that's the challenge, and we'll talk about that in a second. One of the beautiful things about this technology is it really forces us to think defensively. So we say, the machines will do everything that's automated, everything that's routine. What is it about my profession that's not? We should focus on those things. And when you really get down to it, there's very little. We've beaten the system to, everything is routine now. I don't care what kind of company you're in, through things like, you know, business process redesign, we've taken every task and we've made it very, very discrete. We know who does it, who it hands off to, how to do it at the lowest possible cost, how to measure it. And once we get those things in place, they kind of stick. The same thing is happening with talent. The same thing has happened with talent. So we don't profess to have cracked the nut on this. I mean, it's an ongoing process. But we think doing things like the master's program is a step in the right direction. Other questions? Questions, comments? Right, right. So we have it easy in a way in that our tools have to be approved, right? So we have a regulator that has to approve tools and make sure they work. And that's why I mentioned the black box issue earlier. Because right now you can say, here's our software, here's the code, it's finished, we won't touch it, evaluate it. And it's evaluated, and if it works, it gets a passing score. And at some point we'll update it and have a next revision, and we'll get that blessed. But when you have something like machine learning taking place or neural networks, where it's continually churning away on your data, my data, his data, and getting smarter, there is no static state. So that's going to be really challenging from a tool perspective. But also, think about the way we tend to deliver tools in professional services firms. There's a functional spec written up. The lawyers, the accountants, the management consultants come up with a functional spec, and it's handed off to a group that writes the code. And again, it's that siloed approach to doing things, because the people who wrote the tax software, it's highly unlikely they ever consulted with a client or filed a return or anything. So breaking down those barriers is really incredible. So any other questions, any other comments going forward? So, and you can jump back in, so this isn't your last chance, but I just want to show you one last thought on this. And it's where we are right now, and it's even being driven by AI, and we can't fall into the trap. We're moving from scalable efficiency. That's what it's been about since the first assembly line. It's been about scalable efficiency. And usually the bigger you got, the more efficient you got. And there are all kinds of economies that came with scale. As we see now, you can be a very effective law firm with 2 people with 2 PCs. You can be a very effective management consulting team with 2 people and a plane ticket and a PC. All right, so scale isn't so important anymore because of technology. It's made expertise asset light. You don't need a lot of assets to be a professional these days. You need learning, and that's about it. So, as we've all become hyper efficient, and all of these technologies, I tell you, will allow us to become even more efficient. So we're not at the end yet. Moore's law hasn't run out on efficiency yet. We will continue to become efficient. But it's a soul-crushing journey for many employees and people working here. And we've heard refrains, oh, I don't like being a lawyer is not fun anymore. And you know, you can plug in any profession into that, because we've really reduced a lot of it to very, very finite tasks, and the Suskins talk about that all through their book, that you can take anything and break it down to tasks, and we have is a series of professions. So why have a professional services firm? Why have an accounting firm? If everyone can do this kind of stuff with their PCs out on their own, and you can give stuff to people over the internet, what's the reason to even have a firm? Why would we have even companies? So that's really the interesting question here. We'll all be professionals, but are we be, you know, one-offs? Will we be the gig economy where we just do these things part-time? No, we work for firms, and really where firms still have an advantage, and we heard it time and time again in the discussions today, is it brings people together. What's WeWork doing? WeWork gives people an opportunity to get together with other people, not even in their company in many cases, but it's important for driving creativity and collaboration and design thinking and divergent thinking. So firms and organizations still have that. Computers will never take that away. Sure, you can sit in front of your computer and get great training on just about anything, but the tacit learning of what's it like to try a case, or what's it like to question a witness, or what's it like to do an audit, that kind of stuff is best learned from other people who have a passion for doing that. And those people will seek each other out, and they get better at it. And why do people stay at companies? You get better at what you do. It helps you further your development. We know that. The psychologists in the room and the workplace experts know that it's about development. So if we can figure out how to develop people better and faster in our professions, those firms will win. The firms that just take the technology and turn it into strictly an operations efficiency game, people will flow out. The really passionate people will say, I'm not here about optimizing efficiency. I'm here about a passion I have. And those are the people you want. Because as I mentioned earlier, those are people who drive business performance. So the good news is that this could actually humanize us. Right? So as we get all this technology in place, and it tells us how to be hyper competitive and hyper efficient, then we say, okay, we got that. Now how do we attract those passionate people? How do we make this a place they don't want to leave? And you look at like a Google, for instance, with their sabbaticals, they're figuring it out. Okay? Work for us for X number of hours a day, and then work on whatever project you want, whatever is you're passionate about. You know, we'll probably own it anyway, right, from a legal perspective. But you'll stay, and you'll get smarter, and you'll meet other people around the company. We won't have that forced mixers. You'll be picking the phone up, calling other programmers working on other things, because you're interested in those. So there's there's, again, a lot to come out of this, but you have to take a very nuanced approach to it. And you have to think about, how do we scale our profession? We have to scale it by building passion among people that are doing the work for us. Right? The technology will come, it will always come. One day we'll be laughing, we were talking about artificial intelligence, just like one day they were talking about electricity. It will come, it will become part of the fabric of what we do. So I think it's incumbent on us as professionals to figure out, where do we add value above that? And we do. We know we do. So we have to really carefully think that through. Okay, now this is the last question piece before I go. Questions, comments, challenges? Yes. No, so that's a great question. So as we bring folks into KPMG and we show them, what we're doing with Watson, we have those exact discussions. And we're very frank with them. We say, we can't tell you how this is going to play out. Okay, what is it you will actually be doing as an auditor when these different roles are subsumed into what the machine can do? But to the earlier panel, there always is something else. Okay, there are more jobs now, there's more wealth now than there ever has been, and there's more technology. So this fear that technology and rewarding employment are somehow inversely related doesn't seem to be borne out. And again, you can jump to that very far point, and it's really easy to go there to say, well, at some point, everything will be done. There'll be a robot washing my dishes. I won't even have that to do. And that's not useful, because we won't be there anytime soon. And again, washing dishes is probably not the kind of activity that you and I would want to engage in anyway, so it would probably be a great thing. But it's very, very important to bring them in and have them be passionate about figuring it out. Okay, so the folks we have working on this love it. They realize that this is something in development. They don't know where they're going to play, but they want to understand it. They want to know how it works. They want to know what the trends look like. Who's doing better work maybe than we're doing, they're probably thinking, and we'll go work for them. Right? Or I'm glad I'm not at my friend's company. I'm glad I'm here because they're not working on this at my friend's company. So I can't give you an answer. It's like saying, 30 years ago, is advertising going to go away when they have search? And then all of a sudden SEO came up. So you have all these digital marketers out there who didn't have a job, didn't even know what SEO was, and it's become a huge segment. So it's these kind of things spring up once you see how the technology actually is used. Did you have a question? Right. So the question is, how do you teach this kind of stuff, and where is the place of higher education given these trends? So we're doing some work with some universities right now, and actually doing sessions where we're trying to figure this out. And one of the ideas that came out of some of this research is they should be with us. So we should have classes taking place in our facilities on actual real-world problems that their graduates will face. So there's this dance that takes place where we kind of industry tells universities about what they want people to do in the course load and the curriculum and things of that sort. But then again, there's that passage of time, and they're not using the same software in the schools that the client is using. They're not looking at the same problems. And marrying those two and getting a closer connection between the two may be a future outcome that would make sense in terms of training people. And I was talking earlier about the importance of having folks step out of the box and become much more creative and bring in their passion. Who's trained to do that? Not so. We haven't mentioned the C word, culture. Do organizations have the cultures where that is accepted? Well, not many. Are you rewarded for it? Does it show up on your end-of-year evaluation or your quarterly evaluation that you collaborated with a different group and created something new or came up with a new idea? No, it's very much based on what was the performance that quarter, that period, whatever. So there are a lot of moving pieces here, and it's hard to kind of predict how they're all going to interact, and that's kind of one of my boxes on the previous slide. It's very, very difficult to figure out how this will interact. And the question that you asked a moment ago about there's a builder and then there's, you compete against it. Again, that pitches it in terms of there's this monolithic thing called technology that's working against us. At some point, it will replace us. And I think the more likely is we will assume it, and it will become much more of a combined value proposition. So as you're a builder, you will go to jobs with I know a lot about technology, and I can use it much more effectively than anyone else around me. You should hire me. Okay, and that's a perfectly viable model. I don't know how that falls into the Susskind matrix, and we see that with people coming in now. They're like, make me smarter about what's coming, and if you can, I'll come to you and stay with you. Okay, I'm getting the look that time is up, so thank you, everybody. Very good session.
Let's give one more round of applause to KPMG, who's here in the Denver office, and Ed Moran in from New York. That was awesome. So as we started our day, we mentioned that Project X-ITE really lives to bring together all the resources of the University of Denver together to advance innovation, technology, and entrepreneur across the community, the region, and the world. And so events like today, really harnessing the discussion around some of the most important topics that we're all thinking about is what really Project X-ITE and the University of lives to do. So what better place to have the discussion of the future professions than here today with all of you. So first, thank you all for being here. It's exactly the type of discourse and discussion that we want to have around some of the largest topics on campus. And your engagement and your questions really drove the day, and I hope that you can leave this room really thinking not only about the stage that was set with the future professions this morning with Daniel Susskind, but about the places that we work, how we do the work, and who does the work. And then most importantly, I think as we tied it all together with the construct of relevancy, when we think about professions and as we move forward, the relevancy of the activities and bring that all together and the relevancy of our professions in the activities that we do. So a few thank yous. These things don't happen on accident. Nina Sharma, wherever you are, thank you so much for your hard work in producing today's event. Yes, please. We have an incredible team with Project X-ITE, Liz Iraqi, Betsy Hart, and Ryan Wells, our Student Innovation Fellow. And any students you saw with an X t-shirt on today, they're part of our Student Advisory Board. And this is truly an opportunity to really blend the best of students, faculty, our community, and the university resources together. So we're really proud, and thank you so much for your work today. Second, I'd love to thank today Chairman Scrivener and the Chancellor. We're here almost all day. Really appreciate your support. It was amazing to hear your stories, but most of all, when we think about Project X-ITE and the power of what they're putting in place with our new strategic plan, innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology is sitting at the core of the way that the university is thinking about some of the future endeavors that we're creating. And at those intersections, we really believe that we're going to be able to prepare our students to be agile, to be quick, to be nimble on their feet, and be stern in the ability to house all the skills that this great institution will give them, but give them the soft skills and the other elements that will make them most effective in today's workplace. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. These things take time, and we really appreciate you spending all this time with us. We have the opportunity coming ahead to spend some great other events that are inside the world of Project X-ITE to continue these discussions. You can always visit us at projectexcite.org, and there's 3 that I would love to mention. Ryan Wells, our Student Innovation Fellow, has been leading a project called the Discover Challenge, which comes to a culmination on March 4th. We have all 6 Front Range universities competing for $20,000 in I think what Ed Moran discussed as a design challenge or kind of a core innovation challenge, where they're presenting the futures of health and wealth with our partners, Fidelity Labs. So you're welcome to join us on Saturday, March 4th, and see which students and which university rises to the top. Following that, we have the UN Solution Summit. We're really excited about this, and if you're on our email list, you'll be hearing about it very quickly. But we've partnered with the United Nations to bring 18 global entrepreneurial teams to the University of Denver campus for a 3-day boot camp to really energize their companies, show them the power of the ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation in the state of Colorado, and right here bring them together on the University of Denver campus to show them not only the power and strength of our students, but how our community collaborates to fuel what we really believe is global innovation. And last up, on May 23rd, we have our next summit, which is DU Disrupt. This is going to be one of our most exciting summits yet, really looking at the power of disruption and innovation in all the things that we do. And we invite you all back for that. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being here. And one last thing I would love for you all to do is I'd love for you all to stand and please give a round of applause to our Law Dean. Yes, for hosting today with his leadership. As humble and modest as he is, these things are not possible without Dean Smith. Thank you for your leadership, and we invite you all upstairs for some refreshments to get to continue the discussion.